brought to you by Devil Dogs Brew and Beans, where you can get your Gators Breakdown private label coffee. Many flavors and options available at devildogsbrewandbeans.com/Gators Breakdown. Well, let's go back to this defense and a little bit of research done today. And hey, it's not pretty. It's not pretty right now for this defense. Pretty good start to the season, but once we got into conference play, well, you had the performance versus Tennessee, and I think that put us at a certain level where we thought this defense had found themselves, but has since then not so great. So, what we got right here, just the basic metrics of yards per game and yards per play. Right now in SEC play, the Gators are giving up 416 yards per game, 6.9 yard average. In 2022, it is very similar. Gators are only about 7 yards better, 423 yards a game last year. Actually, Will, going to the point that you made all along about this Austin Armstrong offense of giving up big plays. Well, yeah, they're giving up bigger plays this year, actually giving up 6.9 this year, 6.2 last year. So it is worse in that regard. Will, I mean, what this shows us in conference play, where it really matters for Florida is, it's very similar to what we saw last year. It's only a couple of metrics, but yikes. And especially after the great start that we saw versus Tennessee, not being able to build on it, not being able to, really use that as a launching point for this defense, does not speak well to the direction of Austin Armstrong's defense right now. Will, right here, this 416 yard per game total in SEC play would rank 10th in the SEC. That is astonishing. I knew it was getting worse. I didn't know it was this bad until I started looking up numbers and comparing where other teams are in the SEC. But just 10th best in conference play right now when you look at yards per game. So we'll see. As I said, I've cautioned myself against. Hopefully they did find something during the bye week. Yeah, this isn't just a reaction to the Georgia game because there's hardly been any havoc whatsoever this year. No pressure, no sacks, no tackles for loss, and in turn, hardly no turnovers with that. Going to your point there, Will, I mean, when they have, the two biggest turnovers this year were because Florida was creating havoc. Florida was getting pressure in the backfield. But look, there's not enough of that. It was a focus during the bye week, but definitely wasn't there against a Georgia offensive line that's blocked everyone so well. So, if there is more to this Florida defensive front, we need to see it against Arkansas, that offensive line, that contributes. They're 123rd in sacks allowed this year with 31 on the season. As you said, we'll give up about 4 sacks a game. Some of that is on KJ Jefferson, but either way, hey, we know we have a barometer right here. They're giving up 4 sacks a game. You got to go out there and show something on defense this week.
Well, I want to put that 6.9 yards per play into perspective. If that was an offensive team, that's Florida State. Florida State is averaging 6.9 yards per play this year. So Florida has turned every one of its SEC opponents into Florida State's offense. And that's the 7th ranked offense in the country against FBS opponents in yards per play. That's a problem. And, I think we glossed over it, or I think we missed it a little bit because of the McNeese State and the Charlotte games. But they gave up 5.1 yards per play against Utah's backup quarterback. Then 2.8 versus McNeese, and McNeese is probably ranked in like the 200s overall of football programs in the country. They gave up 6.0 yards per play to Tennessee, so it was already creeping up. They gave up some big plays in that game to the Vols. Now, they were able to turn them over real early in the game, get up on them, and the big plays didn't kill them towards the end, but still – a lot of yards that were given up in that one. Then 3.9 against Charlotte. Again, Charlotte's probably in the 110 to 120 of the overall FPI. Then 7.2 to Kentucky, 6.5 to Vanderbilt. In fact, they got outgained on a yards per play basis by Vanderbilt, which is hard to do. South Carolina did the same thing, 7.4 yards per play for South Carolina and 7.4 for Georgia. So basically, the last 4 opponents that the Gators have faced, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, and Georgia, have been the equivalent of the number 1 offense in the country. So it's like they're playing Oregon every week is what it looks like in terms of who they're playing. It's hideous. And the reason you're using yards per play, the reason I use yards per play is if you plot yards per play versus scoring year over year over year, it really correlates with points scored. And so they've actually gotten pretty lucky. You think about the timeout that they didn't get called against Georgia on that first drive that ends up being a field goal, even though they were completely discombobulated. Like, they've gotten kind of lucky in the red zone, and they haven't given up as many points as we might have expected. This could be a lot worse if they'd given up. Like, they should have, based on yards per play, given up about 30 points against Kentucky or against Tennessee. They didn't, because they got some good luck with a couple of things. They got a couple fourth down stops. They got, Tennessee sort of drove the whole field, and then they got the fourth down stops. Those sorts of things. It's just been hideous. And I think it's been all year. I don't think it's just been the last couple of games.
You popped it in my head when you were going through the teams there and what they were gaining on Florida. Since Vanderbilt has started conference play, their 6.5 yard average against Florida is their highest in conference play.
We're making Vanderbilt look like Oregon.
4.4 versus Kentucky, 5.9 versus Missouri, 6.5 versus Florida, 5 versus Georgia, and then 3.6 against Ole Miss this past week.
Well,
wow. I didn't see. Yeah. There we go. We're going down a rabbit hole here live on the episode, and just I think it's a little disheartening because we were hoping in year two of a same system that you would see some improvement, but once we've gotten into conference play, the improvement it really hasn't been there. I mean, we can't hide behind this fact anymore. There's enough data now. There's enough games being played. I hope they figured out something during the bye week and Georgia was just another bad matchup, but I think it's not just a Georgia game.
So I remember writing that I disliked the Austin Armstrong hire with the heat of 1,000 suns. And the reason I wrote it is because of his propensity to give up big plays. And the defense all year long has been really susceptible to that sort of stuff. And the offset, the reason his defense improved so much from year one to year two at Southern Miss is because they started to get pressure, but they were still giving up a ton of big plays. That's the opposite of the way Georgia plays defense, where Georgia just sits there and almost never gives up explosives, though they were more susceptible to it against Florida than they normally are. Yeah. But Georgia doesn't get all these tackles in the back. They don't rely on pressure to stop people. You're always in 3rd and 8 because they don't give you anything. And one of them, Nick Knudsen texted me when this happened. One of the most telling moments was, I think it was 4th and 3. Mertz threw the ball out to Trey Wilson out in the flat, and he got brought down, or maybe it was ETN out in the flat. I can't remember, but he got brought down by Georgia's linebacker. And the linebacker, there was never a doubt the linebacker was going to make the tackle. And that right there exemplifies how Georgia plays defense, which is you throw the ball out in the flat, the linebacker knows where he's supposed to be, he gets out there, he makes a perfect open field tackle, doesn't give you the first down. And this was at Nick next to me. He's like, when's the last time you saw that from a Florida defense? And the answer is, it's been a really long time. And so those fundamental things are things that haven't necessarily shown up on the tape yet at Southern Miss for Austin Armstrong, or here at Florida as well. That doesn't mean he can't get there. That doesn't mean that he's not doing a lot of the same things. And certainly the talent at Georgia is better than the talent at Florida. But look, the talent on the defensive side of the ball for Florida should be better than the 112th best defense in the country. That's just the reality. And last year we sat there and looked at Patrick Toney, and I remember saying, I get that there's some stuff he needs to fix from Todd Grantham, and they've got some of these veterans who have bad habits and all that sort of stuff, but the habits should be improving throughout the year, or you got to bring in the young guys to see what they can do. We should see improvement throughout the year. I'd say the same thing about Austin Armstrong. I think it's a fair assessment. You came in, you had these guys, they should be getting better as the year progresses. We're not seeing that yet. We'll see. You got 4 more, right? I think you evaluate all this stuff at the end of the year, just like you evaluate Napier, you evaluate special teams, you evaluate the overall record. I think the same thing for Austin Armstrong. But as of right now, he is who we thought he was, right? It's the Dennis Green stuff that I started with. The expectation that I had was we were going to give up a lot of big plays. I just had the expectation they'd actually get to the quarterback, and they haven't done that either, which means if you're blitzing all the time and you're not getting to the quarterback, you're exposed on the back end. And every time they're exposed, it doesn't just turn into a 20-yard play. It turns into an 80-yard play. They've given up a ton of just huge plays. And today, Napier during the press conference was asked about TJ Searcy chasing down somebody after a 60-yard gain. what's a defensive lineman doing 60 yards downfield chasing somebody down? That needs to be a corner who's catching that guy downfield. And the bigger problem is the guy who's 50 yards downfield.
There you go. That was it. That was it there. That's where I was going with it. I was listening and researching at the same time, Will. So far, Kentucky's high in SEC play is against Florida's defense. South Carolina's high in SEC play is against Florida's defense. Georgia is second only to their performance versus Kentucky. And I'm about to look up Tennessee right quick, even though it was a loss.
So really, this is the Oprah Winfrey meme. It's like, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car.
Hey, look, I wasn't even trying to pile on. Pile on wasn't even in my plans here, but we have went down a rabbit hole here, and it just keeps getting worse.
It's hideous. It's just hideous.
Let's see. Tennessee, this is the last school here. So they 6 yards. Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely not. 7.8. Well, they had 6.6 versus South Carolina and 7.1 versus Kentucky. So, okay, Florida's defense third best there.
We found one.
We found one. So, yeah, as bad as Tennessee's offense is, that's still, at least in conference play, still pretty good for the Florida defense there. But there we go. We can go back and say, well, it was certainly a mirage of what that defense was able to do. And Joe Milton still very inconsistent as a passer. Tennessee didn't run the ball well until the second half of that game, if I remember right. They are more of a running team anyway. They ran pretty well in the second half. But, as you said, Florida got up so big in the first half, it didn't really matter.
Well, but Dave, here's the thing. 6 yards per play is still bad.
Oh, yeah, don't get me wrong.
It's not. Yeah. I mean, no, it's not like, oh, my God, you're the worst defense in the country bad, but it's bad. Like, you're talking probably like, what, 80th, 90th in the country, giving up 6 yards per play. So we're sitting there going, woohoo, Tennessee. We weren't the worst against Tennessee, but it's still bad. And that, again, to me is sort of the theme of the season when you subtract McNeese and you subtract Charlotte. Now, why it's bad is a completely different answer, and there's probably a lot of diagnosis that needs to go on there.